How does it help working families by flooding the labor market with cheap, illegal labor? How does it improve our schools by packing classrooms with non-English speaking students? I am still waiting for an answer to these questions from the Democrats. But the reality is starting to become obvious to the American people. Coincidentally, after we'd announced this hearing on the impact of this crisis on social services, Mayor Eric Adams kicked 4,000 New York children out of their high school in order to house 2,000 illegal migrants. He has yet to explain why he didn't offer them a plane ticket home instead. Indeed, one estimate from New York City is that the cost of simply educating, let alone housing and feeding, these recent arrivals will cost the city's schools $1 billion next year. That is effectively a $1 billion cut in their school budgets, a $1 billion cut to the funds available to educate legal residents. We have already heard of American veterans kicked out of nursing homes to make way for illegal aliens, of law enforcement overwhelmed by dealing with the accompanying crimes, of American mothers forced to drive 3 hours to deliver their babies because every maternity bed in their local hospital is taken up by a lawbreaker who's no legal right to be here. And we'll hear of more outrages today. Under the Biden administration, schools are becoming illegal alien shelters. Airports are becoming illegal alien shelters. Parks are becoming illegal alien shelters. Police stations are becoming illegal alien shelters. Nursing homes are becoming illegal alien shelters. Hotels are becoming illegal alien shelters. Homeless shelters are becoming illegal alien shelters. All of this is paid for by struggling American families who work hard, pay their taxes, and obey our laws. And when they question this, they're called racist xenophobes by my Democratic colleagues. Now, this crisis is not because of incompetence. This is the deliberate policy of this administration. It's not going to be solved by new laws that the Senate won't pass and the President won't sign or enforce. It won't be solved by spending more money to encourage and support still more illegal aliens flooding our country. And it won't be solved by swapping one leftist official for another. The harsh truth is that this catastrophe was set in motion when the American people elected this administration, and it's going to continue until the American people replace it with one that will defend our citizens, secure our borders, and restore the rule of law. This unprecedented illegal migration is exactly what the Democrats promised to do. It's exactly what they have done, and it's exactly what they have defended for the last 3 years in this Congress. If you voted for them, this is exactly what you voted for. And if that surprises you, you weren't paying any attention. The good news is the American people are starting to pay attention as communities confront the dangers and deprivations that this administration and its supporters in Congress have unleashed upon them. We will quantify some of that in today's testimony and then pray it's not too late to save our country. I'm now pleased to recognize the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we hurtle towards a government shutdown, with House Republicans unable to fulfill their most basic responsibility of agreeing to a funding plan that keeps the government going, last night we shut down the floor because they couldn't even pass their own rules. And yet, here we are, having another hearing to discuss migrants who have crossed the border. And I am sure that once again, we will hear the same false talking points, blaming everything on Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden. The fact is that this country needs fundamental reforms, positive reforms to an outdated immigration system that desperately needs to be modernized, that would allow for multiple legal pathways for immigrants who are already contributing to our country and those who seek to come to this country to contribute. There is so much fear-mongering going on that it is difficult to know exactly where to start. But let me say this. First, the Biden administration is enforcing immigration laws. In fact, the administration has been so heavy-handed in recent months that I have serious concerns about how they are conducting border enforcement. This is especially true when it comes to the administration's regulations that limit access to asylum and the use of expedited processing procedures for families. Today, there are nearly 38,000 people in immigration and customs enforcement detention, which, by the way, is what the Trump administration averaged in fiscal year 2018. But if you listen to my colleagues on the other side, you would think that there are 0 people in detention. The Biden administration has also significantly increased removals in a way that I worry violates migrants' due process rights and their ability to lawfully seek asylum. Since the end of Title 42 last year, the Biden administration has removed or returned to Mexico over 400,000 individuals, including over 65,000 individual members of family units, including children. This total is nearly equivalent to the number of people removed in all of fiscal year 2019 under Donald Trump. So the idea that the administration is not enforcing the law is ridiculous. Second, and I think this is a really important point, this hearing is supposed to distract the American people from the fact that my Republican colleagues have absolutely no accomplishments to run on. Once again, they are trying to scapegoat immigrants by making claims about undocumented immigrants' use of social services. However, under our laws, they are not eligible for the vast majority of federal benefits. But beyond that, it is absurd to say that immigrants are a drain on the economy. Study after study have proven that the U.S. economy is driven by immigrants, both documented and undocumented. Undocumented immigrants pay an estimated $7 billion in sales and excise taxes, $3.6 billion in property taxes, and $1.1 billion in personal income taxes every year. In 2019 alone, Mexican undocumented households contributed nearly $9 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. And that same year, undocumented Mexican workers contributed $14.5 billion to Social Security and Medicare through the taxes taken out of their paychecks, which means that they contributed billions of dollars to entitlement programs that American citizens have the access to, but those undocumented immigrants have no ability to benefit from. Immigrants don't hurt the economy. Let me say that again to the American people who may be watching this fiasco. Immigrants do not hurt the economy. What hurts us are antiquated laws that require the detention of lawful asylum seekers and inefficient and arbitrary waiting periods for work authorization. Laws that lack sufficient lawful pathways for those seeking refuge or better opportunities here. Thanks to President Biden, unemployment is at the lowest level in 50 years. But while employers are growing, they cannot find the workers they need despite attempts to hire American workers. The system keeps out so many immigrants who could help fill these crucial economic needs. As we have been saying for months, we need to expand lawful pathways for those seeking protection to ease the burden at the border. As crises reverberate around the globe and more people need refuge, the law remains frozen in time. We have not had significant updates to the overall immigration system in roughly 30 years. And sadly, in this Congress, led by a party that continues to be paralyzed by self-inflicted wounds, needed immigration reform appears to be out of reach. And now, the administration's supplemental border funding request, which has a lot for both parties to like, has turned into a partisan political football where we are refusing aid to Ukraine against Russian invasion because Republicans want to shut down immigration. Ignoring this request imperils the safe mobility offices in the hemisphere, where migrants can be assessed for their eligibility for refugee status or other lawful pathways. These centers encourage migrants to forego taking the dangerous journey to the border, relieving pressure at the border. These centers need additional funding to be successful. People want to come here lawfully. When the Biden administration provided parole for Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Haitians, border crossings between ports of entry from those countries dropped by 99%. Alternatively, when the Trump administration cut off refugees from the Congo, we started seeing Congolese refugees at the southern border when we had never seen them there before. We also desperately need the additional funds requested for the Shelter and Services Program to reimburse states, localities, and NGOs working to welcome migrants. These are vital funds that would aid many of the states that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say are overburdened. Unfortunately, Republicans in the House remain obsessed with pushing H.R. 2, their cruel, extreme, and unworkable legislation, which would only create more chaos at the border. The Senate has made it clear that that bill is a non-starter. And I worry that some of my colleagues are pushing that legislation because they actually have no interest in actually solving the problem. It is politically beneficial to them to have immigrants out there as a tool to create political division. Just last week, when a member of this subcommittee gave the game away, when he said, quote, "I'm not willing to do too damn much right now to help a Democrat and to help Joe Biden's approval rating." We have been trying an enforcement-only strategy for 30 years, and the results are plain for everyone to see. We can only solve the complex issue of immigration by addressing it holistically and in a bipartisan way that deals with our economic, our humanitarian, and our security needs, not an end run around Congress for bad policy in a supplemental funding bill. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses and the perspectives they bring on this issue. I yield back.
I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is a brand new year, but unfortunately, my Republican colleagues are still running the same tired old playbook. There are real problems facing our nation. The right to bodily autonomy is under attack across the country, from extreme life-threatening abortion restrictions to bans on health care for trans youth. We're not even 2 weeks into the new year, and we've already seen the first horrific school shooting of 2024. We are a little more than a week away from large parts of our government shutting down, and the immigration system is simply not working because Congress has failed to reform it for over 30 years. And what are House Republicans doing to respond to these problems? Mostly fighting among themselves. Their inability to govern led them to pass just 27 bills that were signed into law last year, marking the least productive session of Congress since the Great Depression. And this year is shaping up to be no better. Their historic dysfunction has prompted multiple Republican members of this subcommittee to complain that they have nothing to campaign on. But instead of laying out a legislative agenda to address the needs of the American people, this committee spent its time yesterday focused on a subpoena of the president's son, chasing conspiracy theories in an impeachment inquiry that has not turned up a shred of evidence of wrongdoing by the president. At the same time, the House Committee on Homeland Security held its first official hearing on the impeachment of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas, another inquiry completely devoid of fact, with articles of impeachment reportedly imminent in that committee. I do not know whether the chairman of this committee deliberately waived our jurisdiction on impeachment to another committee, or if Republican leadership simply took it away from him in an effort to appease the most extreme members of the MAGA conference. But the decision sets a terrible precedent. Either way, the decision is a sad commentary on the priorities of the Republican majority. They seem not to care what they break or how they diminish the House Judiciary Committee, while they ignore the real challenges facing the American people. They continue to focus solely on fruitless investigations because they have no plan for meaningful reform to the immigration system or any idea how to address any of the other problems facing our nation. Instead of working with Democrats towards reasonable, workable, bipartisan changes to the immigration system, Republicans will return to their tired playbook and use this subcommittee to demonize immigrants. We will hear in an argument largely devoid of facts and wrong on the law that immigrants are a drain on public benefits rather than the lifeblood of this country. As President Reagan said, quote, "Thanks to each wave of new arrivals to this land of opportunity, We're a nation forever young, forever bursting with energy and new ideas, and always on the cutting edge, always leading the world to the next frontier, close quote. By and large, undocumented immigrants are not eligible for federal benefits. In fact, undocumented immigrants pay into benefits they will never be eligible to receive themselves. Because of this, immigrants, both documented and undocumented, pay billions more into public benefits programs than they will ever get back. They are subsidizing the public. While federal benefits are not available to undocumented immigrants, some states, like my home state of New York and the chairman's home state of California, choose to offer the same state benefits to everyone in their state, regardless of immigration status. That is their choice, and Congress has no say in how states choose to utilize their tax dollars. To the extent that localities like New York City face challenges in caring for immigrants arriving from the southern border, many of these challenges stem in large part from the desire of Texas Governor Abbott to sow chaos by refusing to coordinate with local officials and by choosing instead to use migrants as pawns in his political games. I am proud of New York City's history of welcoming new immigrants. We can and we will continue to do so. In fact, I was pleased to see Mayor Adams announce just yesterday that he is reversing all anticipated budget cuts for the NYPD, the FDNY, and likely the library, school, and other social services programs as well, which he had originally said were needed due to the arrival of migrants in New York. Congress should help, however, by providing additional resources, by passing bipartisan legislation to help ease the transition for many migrants, by ensuring that they could access work authorization more quickly, and by taking up other bipartisan reforms to the immigration system. But time and time again, House Republicans have stood in the way of progress, of innovation, and of compromise. Instead, they insist they will only consider draconian policies that essentially destroy the asylum and refugee programs, policies that stand no chance of passage in the Senate, which shows that they are not interested in real solutions. Real solutions require compromise, and MAGA Republicans aren't interested in compromise. Real solutions rarely get you hits on Fox News or Newsmax, and they won't get you Donald Trump's endorsement. Enforcement alone cannot fix our immigration system. We know this because that approach has largely failed for 3 decades. People didn't stop coming when President Trump and Stephen Miller imposed the cruelest immigration policies imaginable. They didn't stop coming when Governor Abbott lined the Rio Grande with deadly buoys covered in razor wire. They have not stopped coming even with record levels of removals and repatriations and funding for immigration enforcement. We need to expand legal pathways, mitigate push factors, tamp down on corruption, and implement smart border security measures. We have to come together to find solutions that actually work and break free from the partisan entrenchments that have kept us stuck in the past. We will need more border control agents, more asylum agents, and more immigration judges so that asylum cases can be adjudicated in weeks, not in years. And we need immigrants in this country. Forget the fact that the farm, that our vegetables would rot in the ground if they weren't being picked by many immigrants, many illegal immigrants. The fact is that the birth rate in this country is way below replacement level, which means our population is going to start shrinking. And the ratio of people on Social Security and Medicare is going to increase relative to the number of people supporting them. This is a problem faced by every major country in the world. Few countries, however, have the means to solve this problem through immigration. People want to immigrate to the United States. They do not want to immigrate to China or Russia. We are very lucky in that respect, and we should promote it and regulate it properly rather than denounce it ignorantly. Sadly, based on the track record of the 118th Congress so far, I don't think that will be happening anytime soon. I thank the witnesses for appearing before us today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, the gentleman has no time to yield back, and as content as I am in allowing the Democrats to make our case for us, I do want to warn them we'll be enforcing the 5-minute limit on opening statements in the future. Without
Point of order, there are no limits on opening statements in this committee, Mr. Chairman.
There's a 5-minute limit in the House rules, Mr. Chairman. Without objection, all opening statements will be included in the record, and I'll now introduce today's witnesses. We have with us today Chief Manuel Mello III. He's the chief of the fire department in Eagle Pass, Texas, a position he's served in for nearly a decade. Chief Mello started with the fire department in 1992 and has 35 years of experience serving his community. In May 2023, the Texas House of Representatives passed a resolution honoring Chief Mello for his decades of service to Eagle Pass. Our second witness is Mr. Greg Chen. He's the Senior Director of Government Relations for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Mr. Chen graduated from Harvard College and received his law degree from NYU Law School. Our third witness is Steve Camarota. He's the Director of Research for the Center for Immigration Studies and has written extensively on the economic, fiscal, and demographic impact of immigration. Dr. Camarota holds a master's degree in political science from the University of Pennsylvania and earned a doctorate in public policy analysis from the University of Virginia. And finally, we have with us Ms. Daniela Souza Egoroff. Ms. Souza Egoroff is Vice President of the Community Education Council for New York City School District 2 in Manhattan. She holds a master's in public policy analysis from the University of Virginia. Oh, pardon me, a degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. Ms. Egoroff also is currently the project director for Parent Powered New York. A legal immigrant from Brazil, Ms. Souza Egoroff lives in New York City with her family. We welcome our witnesses. We thank you for appearing today, and we'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Great, thank you very much. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. And you may be seated. Please know your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we'd ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and we will begin with Chief Mello.
Chairman Clintock, Ranking Member JPL, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on the impact of illegal immigration on social services, and especially the fire department, our fire department. Eagle Pass Fire Department. The Maverick County is located approximately 140 miles southwest of San Antonio, Texas. Eagle Pass is the county seat and borders the city of Piedras Negras, Coahuila, Mexico, just across the Rio Grande River. Both cities share approximately 120 miles of precious river. We have a population of approximately 70,000, which includes the city and the county, and a fluctuating population of approximately 5,000 to 10,000 additional visitors to the community at any given time. The fire department is a small department with 3 stations located strategically within the city limits. Each station has 6 firefighters on a daily basis, trained in EMS, paramedics, or basic EMS, or EMTs. Total personnel for the fire department are 52 on-shift firefighters and 10 support staff. 12 of the personnel are cross-trained in swiftwater rescue and are divided into 3 team members per shift. Eagle Pass Fire Department is the main 911 EMS provider in the community. We respond to 7,500 EMS calls on a yearly basis. All of our emergency ambulance transfers go straight to the only hospital, which is Fort Duncan Medical Center, which has 18 emergency room beds. Aside from EMS, the Eagle Pass Fire Department also responds to grass fires, house and commercial building fires, and all motor vehicle accidents on 2 major highways and several farm to market roads within our county. The nearest fire department in case of a mutual aid is 1 hour away if available. In 2020, when the migrant influx started to increase, we were below staffing due to different reasons, such as personnel retiring or personnel leaving due to demands of the job, while others left to seek better employment and benefits. Since then, we started a more aggressive employment strategy because of the demand. In 2023, EMS transports increased to over 9,000 calls for assistance. Approximately 10% were migrant-related. Our drownings pre-2020 were approximately 8 to 12 per year. As of December 2023, we had recorded 43 migrant body recoveries for that year. These body recoveries include men, women, and children ranging from 2 months to 15 years old. As a witness to many incidents, I am here to tell you we are being overwhelmed with EMS calls and body recoveries. In my 32 years of service, I had not experienced this many calls. There are days it seems that the ambulance wails never stop. Going to the river or areas along the river's edge where the crossings are frequent has become a norm for us with little or no help from anyone, not even the federal government. I have attached a summary of an incident so you can have an idea of what my men and women go through. This is a summary of 2 Nicaraguan children that drowned in the Rio Grande River by Eagle Pass, Monday, August 22nd, 2022. First call came in approximately at 12:59 p.m. An EMS unit and a swiftwater rescue team responded to the incident located underneath one of the Eagle Pass Piedras Negras International bridges by the Rio Grande River. Upon arrival, Border Patrol were performing CPR on a 3-month-old infant. This patient was transported to Fort Duncan Medical Center with a faint pulse. This infant was later transported to University Hospital in San Antonio in critical condition, where he later died. As the first patient, the 3-month-old, was being treated at Fort Duncan Medical Center, the second 911 call came in at 13:37 for a 3-year-old. An additional ambulance and crew responded with the swiftwater rescue team to the same area where the first patient had been located. On arrival, the EMS crews were advised by Border Patrol that the child was related to the infant and had crossed the river at the same time with family members. He was the 3-month-old baby brother. EMS crews were directed to a pickup truck where the body of the child had been placed prior to EMS arrival. All efforts to revive had ceased due to the length of time the patient had been underwater. The child had last been seen at approximately 12:45. Based on the presentation and time of the patient underwater, it was determined the child had expired. This is just one of many incidents. For example, the mother and the daughter that were walking on the side of a major highway, both struck and killed by a vehicle during a rainstorm. The countless children dehydrated or with hypothermia and in shock that are transported to the hospitals. Young ladies going into labor as soon as they cross the river. And other incidents, including the rail car accidents where amputations are common.
I'm afraid your time's expired, but we'll get back to the points you want to make during the question and answer session. I'm next pleased to recognize Mr. Chen, the Democratic invited witness, for 5 minutes.
Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, and members of the subcommittee, I am Greg Chen, the Senior Director of Government Relations for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. The good news is that immigrants have helped make America stronger and more prosperous, and every day they contribute to its future. To ensure the nation's prosperity, Congress must overhaul the immigration system to meet the country's needs. First, the federal government should address unprecedented refugee flows worldwide that have pushed more people to the U.S. borders. The federal government must ensure the orderly, efficient, and fair processing of migrants. Congress should adequately fund federal agencies to screen cases more quickly, to guarantee protection for people who are eligible for legal relief, and to remove those who are not eligible in a safe and humane manner. Essential to a fair and efficient process is ensuring that everybody in the process has legal representation. Nationwide city officials and local service providers are welcoming arriving immigrants. Some cities are experiencing real challenges and need more federal support. Congress should approve what mayors of both political parties are asking for, and that is an increase for FEMA's Shelter and Services Program, SSP, that funds short-term services. To help cities, governments must also coordinate and share information better. Unannounced buses filled with people are political stunts that make it harder for cities to welcome arrivals. Another critical step is getting work permits for migrants who are eligible to work as soon as possible so they can achieve self-sufficiency. To speed up the work permit process, last fall, government officials set up emergency clinics with volunteer ALA members and other NGOs. The federal government should take more steps like this to get more people working. Importantly, effective migration management will not be achieved by focusing only on the border. Congress must also address systemic delays at all immigration agencies, particularly USCIS, the immigration courts, and consulates abroad. The months and years-long delays in nearly every immigration category exacerbate bottlenecks in border processing. The delays even compel people with approved visas for immigrant categories to come to the border. Some people think the United States should turn away immigrants at the border and restrict immigration. That would be a mistake. The overwhelming evidence shows that immigrants provide enormous benefits to the United States. They are a huge engine of economic growth and contribute billions of dollars in federal, state, and local taxes annually. They consume far less per capita in public benefits than US citizens. Ultimately, it is the ineffective immigration system, not immigrants, that hold back the nation's growth. Congress's inability to update immigrant visa numbers are hurting families and businesses. American families now suffer prolonged waits, months, even decades, for family visas. American businesses across industry sectors are experiencing historic labor shortages. They need people to fill positions that cannot be filled by US workers. In 2022, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, said labor shortages are partly caused by, quote, a plunge in net immigration. In Florida, a lack of workers has forced farmers to cut back production. The Republican governors of Utah and Indiana are asking Congress to create legal pathways for more workers to come for their state. Congress can no longer put aside what it has been pushing aside for over 3 decades. It must pass laws that establish adequate legal pathways to meet the country's needs. Congress should also do what the great majority of Americans want, and that is to provide permanent legal status for dreamers and other people who are undocumented. They are contributing every day to this country, and they'll continue to make the nation prosper. Everyone agrees America needs a better functioning immigration system. We need a system that recognizes immigration is vital to our national interest, that secures the nation's continuing prosperity, and that ensures a fair and orderly border processing system. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next witness is Dr. Camarota.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify on the impact of illegal immigration on public services. Allowing widespread illegal immigration raises profound concerns across a host of issues, from public safety and national security to the impact on American workers and the rule of law. While these impacts are all important, I'm only going to focus on the fiscal impact and the impact on public services today. Now, one of the main reasons we're here is that the current surge of illegal immigration appears to be unprecedented. I've estimated that the illegal population since President Biden took office has grown by nearly 3 million, and that's not the number of new illegal immigrants. That's the number, that's the net increase, which is always offset by legalizations, outmigrations, and natural mortality. The number of new additions is much higher. Now, why do illegal immigrants pay less in taxes than they use in services and create a fiscal drain? The reason is pretty simple. It's because such a large share have modest levels of education, resulting in relatively low average incomes and tax payments, coupled with significant use of many public benefits. Prior research indicates that 69% of adult illegal immigrants have no education beyond high school, compared to about 35% of the US-born population. The fiscal drain illegal immigrants create is not because they are freeloaders who all came to get welfare. That would be a mistake to think that way. Nevertheless, the National Academy of Sciences estimate of immigrants' fiscal impact by education level, using that, we estimate that the lifetime fiscal drain, all taxes paid, all services used, for illegal immigrants, given their education profile, is about $68,000. Some of the largest costs are things you might guess: welfare programs, public education, and treatment for the uninsured. Based on the survey of income and program participation, we estimate that 59% of households headed by illegal immigrants use one of the major welfare programs, compared to 39% for US-born households. Use of these programs likely totals by illegal immigrants about $42 billion a year. Now, some may wonder, how is that possible? Aren't illegal immigrants banned from all these programs? First, illegal immigrant families can receive welfare on behalf of their US-born children, and more than half of illegal immigrant families have US-born children. Also, illegal immigrants under the age of 18 are allowed to receive a number of programs directly, like free school meals and WIC. Illegal immigrants can also receive Medicaid directly under some circumstances, and many states go further in providing more access to Medicaid. Some states also provide food stamps to illegal immigrants, and also, I'll add, several million illegal immigrants have work authorization and valid Social Security numbers, allowing them to receive the Earned Income Tax Credit. The high rate of welfare use by illegal immigrants is not explained by an unwillingness to work. That's critically important. We estimate 94% of all illegal immigrant households have at least one worker, compared to only 73% of US-born households. But it is critically important to remember that welfare use and work go together. In fact, the majority of illegal immigrants and US-born households using the welfare system have a worker. And the nation's welfare system is designed specifically to help low-wage workers with children. Now, in addition to welfare, we estimate about $68 billion in costs for educating illegal immigrants and their children, and about $7 billion in costs for treating the uninsured. Now, my estimate is actually higher than the one cited by Congresswoman Jayapal. I estimate that just to the federal government, illegal immigrants pay about $26 billion a year in income tax, but also Social Security and Medicaid. It's just nowhere near enough even to cover their use of the welfare programs. Finally, illegal immigration does make the U.S. economy larger. I've estimated at least, and this is a minimum estimate, $300 billion larger because they're here. But this is not a measure of their contribution, nor is it a measure of a benefit to the U.S. born. Almost all the increase in economic activity goes to the illegal immigrants themselves in the form of wages, as it should, since they're the ones doing the work. Now, if we do not enforce our laws and instead allow illegal immigration to continue unabated, the strain on public services will continue to grow, resulting in either higher taxes or cuts in services to American citizens, many of whom are often quite poor. Many cities across America are dealing with this reality right now, even as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we have with us Ms. Sosa Egorov. Welcome.
My name is Daniela Souza Igorov. I'm an immigrant from Brazil.
You have to talk.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Daniela Souza Igorov. I'm an immigrant from Brazil. My husband is an immigrant from Ukraine, and my husband's relatives are war refugees here in the U.S. under the United for Ukraine program. New York City is our home. I believe legal immigration has made New York one of the best cities in the world. But the current crisis of open borders and no policy to prioritize who should be allowed to enter our country is threatening New York City. This week, 4,000 students at James Madison High School in Brooklyn were kicked out of their school in the middle of the day to turn their school building into a migrant shelter overnight. This made headlines across the nation, but it is what New Yorkers have been dealing with since this crisis started. Our city has received over 160,000 migrants in the past year, and this has had a devastating impact on the city's finance and social services. In 2023 alone, New York City spent over $5 billion to provide housing and other services for new migrants. Our mayor, Eric Adams, estimates that this will cost $12 billion over the next 3 years. I'm a public school parent and serve as Vice President of the Community Education Council for School District 2 in Manhattan. Every day, I hear from my community concerns about the impact of this crisis in our schools. Here are some concrete examples. Last October, Mayor Adams canceled the classes of 250 incoming New York City school safety agents, which are desperately needed in our schools. He said that parents would have to volunteer to keep our schools safe. Principals have little notice about when they will receive a new influx of students. They don't have time to hire ESL teachers and staff to serve them adequately. To balance the budget, New York City will no longer offer preschool for every 3-year-old who need that in our city. District 75, which serves students with severe disabilities and the most vulnerable population in our schools, will have to cut $1 million per school and reduce staff. This will impact after-school programs, create an even bigger shortage of paraprofessionals. We might put our schools out of compliance with students' special education plans, which are legally binding. Parents in my community cannot understand why the new students were exempt from the vaccines required by the new states, which our students have to take, even though there has already been an outbreak of varicella at a school in our district. But the effects, unfortunately, are not limited to the schools. The elderly were kicked out of their housing to make space for migrant shelters, including a 95-year-old Korean War veteran. The budget cuts to finance this crisis will impact every city agency. Our libraries are not opening on Sundays anymore. The Fire Department of New York has to reduce its head count by more than 50 people. The New York State Comptroller, Thomas DiNapoli, warned that New York City is, quote, teetering on a fiscal cliff, end quote, because of this migrant crisis. Since 1990, no more than 45,000 people were granted asylum in the US per year. But last year, there were 2.5 million border crossings in our southern border. According to the Migration Policy Institute, there are more than 1.3 million asylum applications pending, and it takes on average 4 years to complete the process. New Yorkers want to know, what is the plan to end this crisis? What is the plan? If migrants are receiving letters with an appointment in immigration court to process their asylum in 10 years, in 2030, 2033, will New York taxpayers pay for hotel rooms and shelters over the next decade? We will have to incur $5 billion in expenses every year. How many more services will low-income New York citizens lose to finance this policy? In New York City, nearly 40% of New Yorkers are foreign-born, and 60% live in a household where at least one family was born abroad, like my family. We know exactly why people want to live in such a prosperous, free city and country. But New Yorkers today feel abandoned by our mayor, by our governor, by our city controller, and by the city council. None of them are focused on the interests of New Yorkers and of taxpayers. That is why I'm here, asking Congress to look at this situation before New York City is completely bankrupt, before more low-income New Yorkers lose even more services, and our greatest American city cannot come back. Thank you.
Thank you again for your testimony. We'll now proceed to 5-minute questions from the members of the subcommittee. Because of some scheduling issues, we'll begin with Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman very much. I appreciate all of the witnesses for coming in here today. Mr. Miele, great to have you in from the great state of Texas. Appreciate you coming up. And I'm going to start with you because I know firsthand from my friends and folks that I've gotten to know very well in Eagle Pass and along the Rio Grande, I know what you're dealing with. We talk regularly, and I'm sorry for it. Yeah, I mean, I'm deeply apologetic that the federal government has completely abandoned its duty to do its job at the border and left the people of Eagle Pass and the people of Texas stranded holding the bag, having to deal with obviously the impact on your communities. And So I would just like to hear from you. I know you didn't get a chance to finish your statement. Can you tell me, I mean, I've got information here that suggests that with respect to the EMS calls that your agency receives a day that are migrant related, I've got information that says the Eagle Pass Fire Department receives an average 45 calls a day, 30 of them are 65% being placed by migrants. Does that sound right to you?
That is, can you repeat the numbers, please?
45 calls a day, 30 of them, or 65%, being placed by migrants.
Correct.
Right? That's right. And that puts a particular strain on your job, correct, and on your facilities and resources, right?
Of course, on a regular basis, we would make 22 to 30 calls. That would be on a regular basis where there's no migrants involved.
And it can't be cheap to constantly respond to these calls, right? So the average cost for a call for service is about $700, right? And what it would totals out to each day would be about $21,000 a day to respond to migrants in need of EMS. Does that sound right?
The $21,000 is a little overrated, sir. We're looking at more like between 15 and 18,000.
Okay. So 15, we want to get the facts right. That's still a lot of money, right? $15,000 to $18,000 a day to respond to migrants in need of EMS?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that jump is no doubt put a strain on your employees. Is it fair to say that Eagle Pass residents have to wait longer for EMS and fire service than usual when you're overwhelmed as a result of the border crisis, the number of migrants that have to call into your services?
Yes, sir.
Some reports put the cost for this surge for the city of Eagle Pass at $2.2 million since mid-September. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds a little over.
Okay.
I would put it at probably half of that amount
Okay.
because it fluctuates.
Okay, so $1 million since mid-September on the costs that affect Eagle Pass, but that's $1 million directly as a consequence of that surge is being absorbed by the folks in Eagle Pass.
Yes, sir.
Since September. And so a question here is, with all of this, has the federal government reimbursed your agency for any of these costs meaningfully?
No, sir.
Okay, not at all. Well, thank you for that, and I'm sorry that we're not doing a better job to make sure that you all can do your job without getting overwhelmed. Mr. Camarota, let me just ask a couple quick questions. As of October 2023, the foreign-born population in the United States is 49.5 million people. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or about 15% of the United States population. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that not at roughly the highest levels we've ever had? Or, it's been there once or twice before, but now we're eclipsing it.
Yes, the top was 1890 at 14.8%. America has never been here before, and of course we're headed into uncharted territory in terms of the foreign-born share of the U.S. population.
Right. This population has grown the foreign-born population by 4.5 million under President Biden. So in other words, that 49.5 million is skyrocketing and blowing off that number, correct?
Right. I mean, if this were to continue, again, we just would set new records every month.
And does that not have an effect on education with respect to foreign-born individuals who do not speak English and the demands on schools?
Right. Since the United States spends about $17,000 a year, a little more than that, but per student, the cost of educating children from immigrant families is one of the biggest challenges. But on illegal immigrants, we know that they're just not being able to pay anywhere near enough in taxes to cover that cost, creating real strains.
And a significant upward tick on the use of welfare programs?
Yes, illegal immigrants do make extensive use of welfare programs, which reflects their educational attainment. In other words, less educated native-born people use about the same. It's just that the immigrants are so much less educated on average that overall they have much higher use rates.
So you would agree that the illegal immigration problem at the border is having a massive strain on public resources across the country, and in particular in Texas and border communities and counties?
Yeah, as I said in my testimony, just for illegal immigrants, about $68 billion in public education, but that's for the whole illegal population, and about $42 billion in welfare costs. Again, that's for the whole population, not just the newcomers.
Thanks, sir.
The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Jayapal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Despite the title of this hearing and the claims by the majority, immigrants are a huge engine of economic growth for the American economy. Study after study shows that immigrants are less likely to use benefits that they are eligible for and actually contribute tens of billions of dollars more into public benefit programs than they ever receive. A lack of lawful pathways and an inability to obtain work authorization quickly when they do come through the southern border are the actual issues that need to be resolved. So, Mr. Chen, we see a lot of misinformation circulating online and repeated in the halls of Congress and even in this committee about the types of benefits that are available to undocumented immigrants, including those seeking asylum. So can you please succinctly and clearly confirm whether undocumented immigrants can access federal benefits like Medicare, Medicaid, or health care through the ACA?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. The simple answer is they are not eligible. Undocumented immigrants are not eligible for all of those federal benefits that you just cited.
And what about Social Security? Do undocumented immigrants pay into benefit programs like Social Security, and do they benefit from Social Security?
They do pay in billions of dollars, undocumented immigrants, into the Social Security system through taxes annually, but they are not eligible to receive those benefits.
As you know, there have been a lot of discussions over the last 2 months in the United States Senate about permanently changing immigration laws, including raising the screening standard for asylum seekers, limiting the administration's ability to use parole, expanding interior enforcement and the use of expedited removal, and a new Title 42-like expulsion authority. Many of those proposed changes would make the border much more chaotic. Can you discuss the importance of processing migrants at the border more efficiently and fairly, and how that would positively impact American communities and cities?
So the kinds of solutions that are now being proposed either to provide power to shut down the border or to shut down legal pathways that have been used like parole, those are not going to be effective because people will still come to the US border, and what we'll see is humanitarian crises. We'll see a chaos at the southern border where people are going to be waiting, and they'll be preyed upon by cartels and gangs, and that will create less safe communities on both sides of the border. That is not efficient or fair or orderly processing. What we do need is those kinds of steps. It begins with funding immigration agencies operating at the border to be able to process people more quickly, more efficiently, and in an orderly way, and also to ensure that people who are eligible for relief, like asylum, have a fair shot at it. By doing that, making the system more effective, as you were describing or asking, cities and communities in the United States will have a better system for people arriving. They'll have more awareness of when people are arriving. That's the coordination need for the federal government to help play that role. And importantly, we'll see gains. We will see gains for the country in the long term because immigrants do contribute economically far more than they use in, let's say, public benefits, and that is going to strengthen our nation, and that's an incredible opportunity that we should be able to harness through real reforms to the system.
Real reforms that expand the lawful pathways for people who are seeking protection, something I've been saying for over 30 years. Congress hasn't updated our legal immigration system to keep up with the demands and the needs of the country, and so the Biden administration, like every administration before, Republican and Democratic, has used parole, this idea of parole. Can you discuss the importance of this parole authority that, as I said, has been used by every president over the last 70 years?
Yes, so parole was created in the 1950s, dating back to President Eisenhower. It was used to protect people fleeing from Hungary, from Cuba during the Cold War. And in the past 70 years, it's been used many times to designate special populations for protection. Most recently, President Biden has used it to protect Ukrainians, Afghans, and also Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuelans. The important piece of parole to recognize is that it alleviates pressure at the border. People coming in through parole under the Uniting for Ukraine program, during its first 14 months, when people were eligible to apply for parole under that program, we saw a decrease of almost everybody from Ukraine coming in at the southern border, 99.9% during those 14 months. Similarly, they're not as significant results for the CHNV countries. The fact is, a safe and orderly legal pathway to allow people to come alleviates pressure at the border and will improve border processing. That's why it is so vital.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. Ms. Souza Egorov, thank you so much for your moving testimony. I assume you spoke highly of the Uniting for Ukraine program. I assume you support that program?
I support, and I can tell you that the process to vet my
Thank you.
family's
Thank you.
grandparents were very extensive.
Thank you.
which
I
is
just
not
wanted to
happening
know
at
if
the
you
south
wanted to
border.
continue that program, because Republicans have actually refused to continue that program. In H.R. 2, it would eliminate the Uniting for Ukraine program. I had an amendment to keep that in, and Republicans voted against it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, next is Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all our witnesses. The interesting thing about parole is this. Over the last 25 years before the Biden administration, parole was administered on average 15 times a year. The statute is very clear. It's meant to be a particularized, individualized program, and that is exactly what Secretary Mayorkas confessed and admitted was the purpose of parole when he testified. Yet in the last 18 months, over 1 million people have received parole status. You want to know what draws people to the border? It is catch and release programs like parole, where they're given documentation to go work for a couple of years, then you lose track of them. Because right now, as our witnesses testified, the actual court dates for your asylum claim are 9, 10, 12 years off. That's what's happening in Eagle Pass right now. They're moving that far past. And it's good to see Chief Mayo here. Had an opportunity to meet with you last week. Thank you for taking time with us. I just want to clarify, your fire department has 5 ambulances, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And of those 5 ambulances, how big is your service area and population for your fire department?
It's 1,200 square miles and we cover, and 120 miles of riverfront.
And the population?
Population, 70,000. And it fluctuates from 70,000 to 60, 65,000.
Of your 5?
10,000 more, 80,000.
And of your 5 ambulances, you dedicate one almost every day solely to dealing with illegal migrants, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And occasionally you have to go beyond 1 and 2 and maybe more.
Of course, yes, sir.
And that imposes constraints on how you service legal residents of your service area.
Sometimes our residents are left without an ambulance service.
So I also met with the head of the Fort Duncan Hospital, Regional Hospital, last week as well. And what he was confiding in us was that the local residents, many are wondering why those who are here in the country illegally are getting treated ahead of them. And his response was, well, it's acuity. Of course it's acuity. But because those people are illegally in the country, they are displacing the local residents regardless of acuity, right? Is that fair to say?
We have times where there's been 2-hour wait for our patients inside the ambulance just to try to get one patient inside, a local resident inside the hospital.
Yeah. So and I appreciate what's going on in New York. I mean, that sounds horrific, but I want to put context to it as well. You guys are dealing with it in New York, a community of 70,000 Eagle Pass dealing with it, and you saw a massive surge of illegal migration over the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, right?
Yes, sir.
And I also went down to Lukeville. Lukeville is population 35. And in Lukeville, over the last 3 weeks, more than 30,000 illegal migrants entered. There is no services in Lukeville. Ajo, which is kind of where the CBP is centered there, they have no services. It's overwhelming. I stood there and watched gaps in the fence created by cartel coyotes who coming and cut the fence. The day I was there, they'd already repaired 6 different locations. We drove miles. There's no CBP even able to patrol. Why is that? They were all at the processing center, where I visited and saw individuals from Guinea, Burkina Faso, Senegal, India, Pakistan. I am stunned I am stunned when I hear people say, well, you know, there is no, effectively, we need to change the immigration system. You know what, Mr. Camerata, EMTALA. Who gets EMTALA? Who can get EMTALA? Do you have to be a citizen? Does anybody ask if you're a citizen before you get EMTALA benefits when you go to the hospital?
No, obviously, if it's emergency care, anyone immediately gets benefits.
And it's not just emergency care anymore. The ED is now used as a general and primary physician. You go in because you have the flu. You don't go to your doctor because these individuals don't have doctors. I would be very curious to know what your study would reveal with regard to the use of EMTALA benefits, because trust me, in Eagle Pass, they are using EMTALA benefits to go in there and overwhelm that hospital. That I yield back.
Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chen, since the spring of 2022, Governor Abbott of Texas has bused over 90,000 asylum seekers to cities across the United States, sending approximately 1/3 of them to New York City. He has done this without any coordination with the receiving cities. You touched on this in your opening statement. In fact, just yesterday, a CBS article highlighted how Texas sabotaged efforts by nonprofits to create a more orderly system. I'd like to submit that article for the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Chen, how does this lack of coordination make it harder for nonprofits and cities to help welcome and integrate migrants into their communities?
Thank you for the question. I think the main issue here is the surprise factor. When unannounced buses are coming at different times, sometimes late at night, and the welcoming cities or service providers are not aware when they're going to come, it's just going to make it more difficult for a shelter to make sure there's adequate bed space, for other service providers providing perhaps emergency medical care or other needs. It's going to be much more challenging for them. And that's why there need to be better coordination and support from the federal government, like the Shelter and Services Program that provides assistance to fund local provision of services.
Thank you. Over 1 million people are in the asylum backlog. The average adjudication wait time for an asylum application is now over 4 years. Mr. Biggs pointed out that it takes years to process asylum claims. The Biden administration's supplemental funding request included a request for funding to hire more immigration judges and asylum officers. How would hiring additional adjudicators help tackle the backlog, speed up processing, and improve conditions at the border?
It would help in a very direct way. ALIS supports the request in the Biden supplemental funding request for 1,600 more asylum officers to be hired. Having more asylum officers will speed up the process for screening cases of people who are asking for asylum. That is simply going to make it more expeditious and also more fair for the system overall. And what it'll do is that kind of a benefit will inure to the overall system, because what we see now is that USCIS doesn't have enough case officers to handle other kinds of cases, such as employment-based benefits, family-based benefits. So we see delays across the board unless you fund USCIS to have enough asylum officers and other case officers.
So this would greatly reduce what Republicans refer to as catch and release.
It would help avoid the need for people that are coming not to be able to be screened quickly enough and to wait for their cases for a long period of time.
Thank you. Mr. Chen, for much of our history, our country welcomed immigrants with open arms and in very large numbers. In fact, when Ellis Island was operational, in 1 year alone, it processed over 1 million people. If we compared that level of intake to today's population of New York City, it would mean that Ellis Island admitted the equivalent of 17,770 people a day and 6.5 million people in a year. But such high numbers of arrivals didn't negatively impact the city economically. For much of the 20th century, countless industries were fueled by the influx of immigrants. Were those who arrived to Ellis Island able to work as soon as they got to the United States? And what has changed between then and now?
That is the linchpin issue that you just touched upon there, sir. The fact is that immigrants arriving at Ellis Island were able to work immediately. And asylum seekers now, and many immigrants who are coming, are not eligible to work initially, and they need to apply for work permits for those who are. That delay makes it harder for those recent arrivals to become self-sufficient quickly. Immigrants can contribute tremendously to the country. If they're able to sustain themselves, they'll get out of shelters more quickly and be able to support themselves and their families. What we have seen statistically is estimates are that if asylum seekers, the numbers were to decrease by 10%, you'd see about a $9 billion loss in overall economic benefits to the country over about a 5-year period. That's further indication of how much asylum seekers and immigrants coming will contribute if they're allowed to work.
Now, how long do asylum seekers have to wait before they may apply for employment authorization? How does this waiting period hurt employers and asylum seekers in the United States? And would you think that asylum seekers should be given work authorization immediately upon arrival?
So asylum seekers typically have to wait 180 days, 6 months before they're allowed to work coming to the country. And that period means that asylum seekers aren't able to become self-sufficient as quickly as they otherwise might be. The important step here is to be able to have asylum seekers apply more quickly. And actually, Congresswoman Chile Pingree has the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act that AILA supports that would enable that. It would also make sure that the period during which they could work would match the time during which they're waiting for their asylum application to be granted, rather than having to apply to renew those work permits on a regular basis. The fact is, if it takes 4 years for somebody to get their asylum case looked at and granted, you don't want them having to renew regularly that work permit application, because it is actually taking about 16 months right now to renew work permits. So those are all ways to speed up the system, make it more efficiently, and make sure that people that are here are able to work and contribute.
Gentleman's
Thank you. I
time has
yield back.
expired. Chairman Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sousa Egoroff, thank you. Well, thank you all for being here, Ms. Egoroff. I want to talk more about the children and what's happening to kids in the New York schools. In your testimony, you said at your last meeting, you had a mother talk about how school buses are overcrowded, that her son has only been on time to school, I think, a couple times the entire school year, which is unbelievable. You said migrant students are exempt from vaccines. You've had some outbreak of something here. Safety agents training to protect kids at school has been curtailed. Students with disabilities, their schools have been cut $1 million per school. I mean, this is after kids have just went through the whole COVID experience and everything else. And now we've seen in the news the last couple of days what's happened with the one school where the kids go home and learn from home. We're going to put migrants into school. So this, to me, seems to be the issue that I think is really hitting a nerve with the American people. Like, this is happening to our kids. How many migrant students are in the New York public school system this school year? New migrant students are in the system.
I don't have that specific number. What I can tell is that in my district, I believe the last number was around 5,000. My district is 2/3 of Manhattan. And we have, in my district, we have a lot of the hotel rooms that are being used for as shelters and where families are prioritized. So we have a disproportionate number of families as in the shelters because, of course,
the comptroller, in your testimony, you have a quote from the comptroller, and he says 12,000 migrant students in the New York City public schools since June 30th. Is that an accurate number in your judgment?
I believe so, yes.
12,000 new students brought into the schools in just the last 7 months. That seems to be.
Yep.
Do you have children in the New York public schools?
I do have.
Have you seen an impact with your kids and the type of education they're getting?
What I have seen is an impact in the entire district. So from the buses that are running late, I think particularly just principals are very concerned because they never know when they're going to get new students. And I am the founding board chair of a charter school in Brooklyn that was specifically designed for students who don't speak English. I know how much it takes to teach children who don't speak English at home, like my kids, to learn English. It's very specifically designed work. You need qualified teachers, and even if we have the resources, there are just not enough ESL qualified teachers in New York City to be hired. The other thing that I think is very important is the safety issue, because this is the number one thing that I hear from parents in my community. They want more school safety agents in their buildings. There is a lack of school safety agents, and the fact that Mayor Adams had to cancel this class, which I can't tell you how desperately needed it is. We have had, after COVID, dramatic increase in bullying and violence in our schools. I'm the chair of the school safety committee, so I hear the most extreme cases in my district of kids who are getting a safety transfer, where they want to go to another school because they don't feel safe. And the number one thing that we want is more school safety agents. And this has been cut, and he said that now parents will have to volunteer, which we are not qualified to be school safety agents. We don't have the training, and many parents don't have the
Should
capacity.
the federal government stop the practice of releasing illegal migrants into the country? Should we say no more illegal migrants are allowed in the country? Should we do that?
I think we should follow federal law.
Yeah.
I think we should follow federal law.
Okay.
And what I can tell is that my family, we have been through many, many processes of getting a visa. I've been a student visa, a work visa. My family just became a refugee, and the vetting process is extensive. My husband's 85-year-old grandparents who lost everything they had when Russia invaded Ukraine had to wait many months. We had to provide extensive documentation to be able to get the visa. And so I think legal immigrants like myself look at this process and ask why there is this double standards, why we're not asking any kind of documentation, there is not any kind of vetting process.
Yeah, you did it the right way, and you're feeling it personally. You did it the right way, and yet your kids who need the services in the school are being denied that because of folks who aren't doing it in the legal and appropriate way. How long have you been on the Community Education Council?
It is my third year. I'm on my second term.
And you're the vice president of that group?
Yes, I've been elected by the school parents in District 2.
Well, I'm sure they appreciate, as we do, your hard work on behalf of kids, and particularly at this troublesome time. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, I'd like to submit for the record 2 articles, one entitled Shut Out of DACA and Traditional Jobs, Young Immigrants Start Businesses. Second one, what rising immigration really means for the state of California's economy. I can submit those for the record, sir?
Without objection.
And first, I want to thank all of our witnesses here today for being here to give us your perspective. Immigration is the issue of America. We're all immigrants here today. I look around, none of you here are natural American Indians. All of our ancestors came to this country, and God knows 2 or 3 generations ago what the newspapers would have said. But I think if we look into those newspapers, the rhetoric was probably the same. And Mr. Carmota, you started talking a little bit about the cost benefit. I'd like to see more research into that, because, you know, California today, we're the fourth largest economy in the world, and we're a net donor of revenue to the federal government. That stopped temporarily during COVID. We have probably the most manufacturing in the United States, and I can tell you who works at those jobs, okay? A lot of our farm industry, ag, relies on undocumented workers. You're not gonna deport them. You know, this country, as a national defense policy, we need to be independent and strong in 2 areas. Energy production, no more OPEC oil embargoes. And number 2, food production. Heaven forbid it if we have to import our food one of these days. And that second one, food, that's agriculture. You know, in 2019, I got a phone call from a lobbyist on the poultry industry. 2019, there was an immigration raid in Mississippi, picked up 680 undocumented workers at a poultry plant. You know what that did to that county? Brought it to a standstill. And this lobbyist for the poultry industry wanted my help to keep those workers going. So, you know, we do need to look at both sides of the issue and really deal with the facts. Now, Ms. Sosa, I heard some of your comments. I'm probably the only member in Congress that was in Tijuana, Mexico, inspecting, touring the Ukrainian refugee camps. I saw those refugees being processed. You know how long it would take them to get processed? About 2 or 3 days. You know where those camps are at now? They're closed. You know why they're closed? Because now a Ukrainian asylum seeker can apply directly from Europe to come to the U.S. One of my colleagues the other day was saying, you know, we can use Ukrainians But the reason he was saying that, and I don't think he understood what he was talking about, was Ukrainians can get a work permit right away. These other folks can't. So we have to really look and drill down into the facts to figure out what a good immigration policy needs to be for the United States. It's not zero, it's not all, it's a good position for this country. Talk about farm workers. Let's talk about Silicon Valley in California. We still do some ass kicking over there. High tech, research and development, biotech. We are the world's leaders. You know what those workers, you know where they're from? A lot of them, Indian Americans, Asian Americans. And Silicon Valley, if you talk to that industry, they can't get enough workers from there. We need immigrants. What we need is an adjustment to our immigration policy. When it comes to asylum seekers, Mr. Carmenota, you talked about the U.S. being in unprecedented territory. 20% of our population now, foreign-born. Unprecedented. It used to be like 19, now it's 20%. 100 years ago it was 19.
It was 14.8 is the peak in 1890.
The numbers I saw was, well, okay, we'll buy your numbers. Are some of those immigrants participating in our nation's military?
You're talking about the whole foreign-born. There should be no illegal immigrants in the military.
Can't be, but a lot of green card holders are part of our military.
Absolutely.
And a lot of undocumented immigrants want to join the military and they can't. So the fact that you have such a high number doesn't mean it's bad for the U.S. I bet you if those undocumented could, they would join the military and they would be true Americans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time and I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. So it was talked about coordination with local municipalities, right? You believe in that there should be coordination that goes on when resettling refugees or asylum seekers, anything like that, correct? With a local community?
Coordination generally will improve their processing, yes, for both refugees and asylum seekers.
And isn't it a requirement in federal law that you have to consult and coordinate with states and local municipalities from the federal level? Isn't that correct?
I'm not sure about that.
So you don't know that part of the law? Is that it?
I just don't know that specific question.
Yeah, okay. Because it is required to do that, and it's currently not going on by organizations like World Relief and others in my home state of Wisconsin, where they're not coordinating, they're not working with local municipalities, and very unfortunate.
If I may comment, sir, my understanding is many of the federal refugee organizations that work with the federal government are typically in very close coordination with all the state agencies that support that. It's a state, local, and federal partnership with local providers like World Relief that you mentioned. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't that kind of coordination. So that's an area that perhaps could be worked on.
You're about to be surprised because maybe they're talking to the state, but the federal and state is not talking to local municipalities. In fact, they excluded Chippewa County from those discussions in bringing refugees to western Wisconsin. You said remove those who are not eligible in a safe and humane manner. That's part of your, just a small segment of some of your testimony. Remove those who are not eligible in a safe and humane manner. Can you give me an example of somebody you believe should be removed?
So we have a very thorough immigration law process that begins with asylum seekers, for example, if they are going to seek relief.
Give me a specific example of somebody that you think should be removed.
If there is a full...
I'm going to move on to the next question. Should everyone get an attorney? That's what I heard in your testimony. Anyone that comes to our border, they should get an attorney. Is that right?
So legal representation has been shown to greatly improve both the fairness of the system and the efficiency. If you have a lawyer...
So the American taxpayers should pay for the lawyers also. Not only should they pay for the hospitals, not only should they pay for the schools, not only should they pay the SNAP benefits, they should also pay for the lawyers to allow them as people from outside the United States to be able to come into America.
It makes the system work much more efficiently if a judge doesn't have to explain to an individual that's appearing in front of the judge what the legal process is. It'll make the entire process more efficient. And that's what we are about here, is making sure the system is more efficient, fair, and orderly. That will help improve the processing.
Yeah, is it ever fair?
That's what we're all about.
Is it ever fair at this point? Ms. Egorov, you were cut off by the ranking member when you were going to complete your answer on the vetting of Ukrainians. Is there anything you wanted to add in regards to that, to give context to what you were about to say?
My husband's grandparents were 85-year-olds, and they lived in Kharkov, Ukraine, and they only left their house when it became unlivable for them. So they only left their house and tried to come to America when there was a bomb dropped in the courtyard. It killed 8 of their neighbors, and it blew out the windows of their apartment in the middle of the Ukrainian winter. So they were literally freezing to death. They would have never been able to cross the border. So I really think that the process of accepting refugees should accept the most vulnerable refugees, who are vast majority of women and children.
So there should be some context in regards to this.
And they made their way to the border with Poland, and they waited there for a very long time. Our grandmother did not have a passport because she had never left the Ukraine in her life, and so she had to provide documentation to prove that she was from Ukraine, and then we had to provide documentation that we would support them here. So there was a long process. I think it was about 3 or 4 months at least.
I really want to get to another question for you here. You cited public health concerns. Are there many parents that you're working with that are really concerned about public health issues? We're hearing about diseases that are coming from outside of America to places like New York City. Are you hearing those concerns?
There was one specific outbreak of varicella in my district last year. So the city health commissioner sent a letter to all health officials in New York City saying that the vaccination rates in the countries that are sending immigrants here is much lower than in the US. So there is this concern. I think the biggest problem is the double standards. My community were just blocked from entering school buildings for 2 years if you didn't have the COVID vaccine. Students couldn't play sports, even outside, if they didn't have the COVID vaccine. Like parents who couldn't take the COVID vaccines for health reasons, not even ideological health reasons, couldn't see their children's graduation. And then now suddenly, anybody who arrived can get in without any vaccine, with vaccines that we have decades of data. I think there is a problem of trust now in terms of the double standards. We just went through so many rules. I'm sorry.
No, thank you very much. I yield back the double standard, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for a unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following reports showing the economic benefits of immigration. A report by Giovanni Perry, The Economic Benefits of Immigration. A report by the National Bureau of Economic Research, The Economic Contribution of Unauthorized Workers and Industry Analysis. A report by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, Undocumented Immigrant State and Local Contributions. 3 reports by New American Economy, examining the economic contributions of undocumented immigrants by country of origin, Keeping Medicare Solvent, How Immigrants Subsidize Medicare's Trust Fund for All U.S. Seniors. And the 3rd one, Immigrants Contribute More in Insurance Premiums Than They Receive in Benefits. A report by the George W. Bush Institute, Benefits of Immigration Outweigh the Costs. A report by the Bipartisan Policy Center, Immigrants and Public Benefits, What Does the Research Say? A report by Forward US, The Positive Economic Impact of Immigration. A report by the University of Pennsylvania Wharton Business School, The Effects of Immigration on the U.S. Economy. And a report by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Immigrants Contribute Greatly to the U.S. Economy Despite the Trump Administration's Public Charge Rule Rationale.
Just for clarification, those are reports on immigrants, not illegal immigrants.
These are reports on immigrants and the economic benefits of immigration, which include documented and undocumented immigrants.
Right, which is what the Democrats love to do, is to conflate.
Mr. Chairman, are we having a colloquy? Because I'm happy to engage in it, but I had a unanimous consent request.
I just want to clarify.
I want to clarify that undocumented immigrants and documented immigrants contribute to the U.S. economy, and any any indications that they do not is excluding the contributions of undocumented immigrants as well as documented
And I
immigrants.
just wanted to be clear that you're confusing the two. Thank you.
I'm not confusing the two,
is
Mr.
there
Chairman.
any
I'm
objection?
including both because both contribute.
Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the unanimous consent request is approved. Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's really important for all of us to take a step back and recognize what's really happening here. This is another example of the Republican majority's efforts to continue to demonize immigrants. That's what this hearing is about. The hearings that we've been having on this subcommittee haven't been focused on leading us to a solution or finding bipartisan compromise. Unfortunately, the hearings that this subcommittee has been having have focused on trying to paint the picture for the American people that immigrants should be feared, immigrants should be hated, immigrants are bad, when we know that the contrary is true. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge some truths if we are going to find a solution, because we absolutely do need a solution to this very significant domestic challenge. Immigrants make our country better. I mean, one of our, Ms. Egrov, you're an example of immigrants improving our country, adding to this country. Our ranking member is another perfect example of that. The examples are all around us. They help our economy. They are part of the fabric of our nation and of our communities, and they represent a net positive to who we are as Americans. But another truth is that the status quo is absolutely unacceptable. And it should be unacceptable to all of us, whether we are Republicans or whether we are Democrats. I represent El Paso, Texas. My border community has seen some of the highest encounters with asylum seekers, with refugees, with people fleeing their homeland, trying to get to safety and security in hours. And I'm a third generation El Pasoan. I'm the only member of this subcommittee and this committee who was born and raised on the border, raised her children on the border. I'm so proud to be a border resident. But I will tell you, my community has seen some significant challenges as a result of the really significant number of people who are fleeing their homeland. And I think it's important for us to recognize it's not just a US issue. We are seeing more people leaving their country across the globe than probably ever before. Certainly in the Western Hemisphere, this is historic, at least in my recollection and for my generation. And the response to such a significant challenge shouldn't be to demonize immigrants, but it also shouldn't be to refuse to compromise. We have to compromise and come together if we are going to find the solution. And we should recognize the opportunity in this moment. We have 8 million unfilled jobs in the country. 8 million. We are not achieving all we could achieve as a country without immigrants, and we can't do it. Now, my Republican colleagues will point to H.R. 2, their border bill, as the solution. But guess what? Their border bill is a fantasy, and any of them who've taken the time to read it would recognize it. Any reporter who's taken the time to read it would recognize it. The fundamental component of H.R. 2, the Republican solution, is that Mexico will accept all migrants that we expel from our country. That's never happened. It will never happen. So while they continue to say, oh, we've got our solution, H.R. 2, it's a farce. It's a fig leaf to hide the fact that they bring no real solutions to the table on their own. I'd like to share with all of my colleagues on this dais that there is a solution. It's called the Dignity Act. It's the first bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill that addresses the border and beyond. It lives up to our values without the egregious cruelty championed by many on the other side of the aisle. It provides legal protections for immigrants that are here, and it addresses the biggest challenge we have at the border, which is unfair to migrants. The status quo is unfair to migrants, unfair to federal law enforcement, unfair to border communities, unfair to receiving communities. It's time that Congress does its job and engages in bipartisan compromise and finds a real fix. And I'd encourage everyone to look at the Dignity Act. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Sparks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure, but I might be actually the only member of Congress who actually immigrated as an adult, not with parents as a baby, as a child, and brought by the family, but actually as an adult at the age of 21, made decision to legally immigrate to the United States from Ukraine. So I understand the contribution, of what immigrants done to this country. We're a country of immigrants, but country of legal immigration and laws. And what I want to talk to you a little bit, you mentioned about your, husband's parents coming from Ukraine. Do you believe it's happening right now, since we have illegal immigration overwhelming our system, somebody with legitimate concerns? And I hear from a lot of, including Ukrainians that coming through the program, that they're coming, there are a lot of challenges with that because there is no capacity for legal immigration, and a lot of time it's becoming perverse. If you come here legal, as you mentioned, my husband to sign off on a lot of papers that I'm not going to be burdened in society. I never took any benefits. I came for opportunities and job and hard work, not to welfare. Now we're creating a system where a lot of people come illegal and get benefits much better than you come here legally. You really kind of disincentivized, go through legal system. So do you believe, Ms. Yegorov, that what is happening right now, it actually hurts legitimate asylum seekers, legitimate people avoiding persecution or have refugees or try to come here to contribute to society? What are your thoughts on that?
I think absolutely. The problem is that the vast majority of refugees that have been vetted by the United Nations are women and children from just 3 countries, right? Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan. This is not the same population that we're seeing coming through the southern border. So we're not accepting the most vulnerable refugees. Based on public data that I found in New York City, 80% of the new migrants in New York City are single adults. And if 50% of the refugees are women and children, there is a disconnect. We are not, the most vulnerable cannot even make the cross in the southern border because it's very dangerous. And so the most vulnerable will never be able to cross the border.
Yeah, and that is a challenge. And I actually just went to the border and was always, had mostly the adult males who go there. But Mr. Chan, you talk about something, processing at the border. Would you agree that we should have immediately determined, regardless how we believe in asylum standard, determination right at the border and denying entry to people that illegitimately applying for asylum? Would you support adjudication and denying an entry immediately at the border?
So thank you for the question. I don't think that would be practically possible to make a determination for some so quickly. Asylum is a very
So why do you want all these judges then? If they cannot adjudicate immediately, why do they want them? Just to provide more papers and wait more years? Why do you even, if you cannot do that, what's the point of you wanting to have more judges if you cannot have immediate adjudication?
So there aren't judges typically sitting at the border region to be able to...
Yeah, but you say we need to have more. So what would they be doing there? Just giving more papers? What would they be doing if they're not adjudicated and immediately deciding if entry would be allowed? What are they for there?
So I think we completely agree here about the importance of having an efficient and orderly process that quickly can screen people like asylum seekers for eligibility. The question is just how do you do that operationally to make it effective?
But you would not disagree that we should have immediately adjudication and making decision at the border, regardless how we feel about the standard, because HR 2 increases standard, and it's actually a reasonable standard. More likely than not, it's still 50-50 standard, so it's a pretty still high standard, considering, how many people abusing the system, and legitimate asylum seekers actually that truly can be prosecuted and killed by their government have a hard time now because there is no prioritization. So you think that should be happening at the border and we should deny an entry?
So what I don't think would work is, I think you used the word immediately a couple of times. It takes time for an asylum seeker to understand and explain his or her case to an asylum officer.
But it's okay, maybe that will time, but they would not be allowed an entry in the United States, right? So they can stay, in we can, in the detention facilities, but ultimately they would not be given notice to appear and go in the country. Is that correct? You agree with that?
I'm not, that is the process right now, is that somebody who's seeking.
No, now they're releasing, because they don't have ability. We're so overwhelmed. But you said like cartels, if we have that, would actually be preyed upon people. But aren't they preying upon people right now? I mean, have you been at the border and see what's happening? The situation now, you believe they're not preyed upon by cartels, and it's huge. I mean, women and children, and we have people pretty much being abused.
I have been to the border, and people who are seeking asylum, people here waiting at the border. I was just in the Nogales port this fall. People are waiting for weeks, sleeping at those turnstiles to be able to gain entry because there aren't enough capacity.
Because cartels are abusing the system. I yield back. My time is expired, and using them the pawns.
If I could just expand my
At the
answer a little
request
bit.
of the minority, Ms. Ross is next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member. I request unanimous consent to submit for the record the New York Times article, GOP governors vow to close doors to Syrian refugees.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. I want to pick up a little bit on the conversation that my colleague, Representative Escobar, had about how we need to do both deal with the border and deal with legal immigration. I represent North Carolina's 2nd Congressional District in the Research Triangle. I want you to know I rarely hear about the border from my constituents, but I know because of my role in Congress and on this subcommittee how important it is to deal with the border. But I do want you to know that I hear from employers in my district every day about the need to fix our broken immigration system and allow more people to come here and work, either while they are waiting for their immigration status to be taken care of, or under a legal immigration process which has a decades-long backlog. I hear this from our Chamber of Commerce. I hear this from the Farm Bureau. #1 issue for the Farm Bureau and agriculture is the #1 industry in North Carolina. I hear this from the Hotel and Lodging Association, and I hear this from the medical community. And I want to bring up, because we're talking about social services, some facts about our workers in the healthcare industry. According to a 2021 report from the Center for American Progress, approximately 365,000 undocumented immigrants worked in healthcare during the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to providing needed care, they cleaned hospital rooms, served meals, managed front desks, and more. These are not the highly skilled immigrants that the tech industry is looking for. Rather than draining our social services, these individuals played and continue to play essential roles in our healthcare services. They did so at a time when healthcare and other social service sectors are struggling with worker shortages. Of course, this is in addition to the taxes they pay into the system. For the most part, they cannot access, particularly through Social Security. Imagine the tremendous impact these workers could have on our social services if our country expanded opportunities for these individuals to obtain legal status and harness their full potential and talents. Right now, we have low unemployment and massive demand for workers that U.S. citizens alone cannot meet. Yet we put up roadblocks in front of immigrants to work here. Our legal immigration system has not been updated for over 30 years. That means our legal immigration levels are still where they were when few people could even use the internet. I'd like to address a couple questions to Mr. Chen in my last minute. Are our current temporary worker programs adequate to meet this demand?
Thank you for the question. I would say our temporary worker permit programs, employment authorization programs for workers and for permanent are not adequate. And we have demand far exceeding the need for H-1B, H-2A, agriculture programs across the board.
And can you discuss how the creation of additional legal pathways can impact the numbers we're seeing at the border?
So expanding legal pathways would do tremendously in terms of improving both the pressures at the border to alleviate that, as the Pearl program has done, but also to address the kinds of important employment and business issues that you've just been describing that are impacting the country. The fact is that both Republican and Democratic leaders across the country and businesses, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, are asking for more legal pathways to enable people to come here. We've had a lot of talk about people not coming or coming in the right way. The problem is we don't have adequate right ways for people to come exactly to meet the kinds of needs you are talking about here, Congresswoman, to meet the needs of the country, both for families and businesses that would make America stronger.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Mr. Nails.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, was here earlier. His testimony, he stated that Governor Abbott has sent, from Texas, has sent 80,000 of these illegal immigrants to New York on buses. I personally think that's a beautiful thing. I think it should be 180,000. Matter of fact, I'm willing to help pay for some of the buses to send more and more to these welcoming cities, these sanctuary cities. Mayor Adams now says he's overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed. Other cities, Chicago, we're overwhelmed. Heck, we send not even 100 or so to Martha's Vineyard. We got to call the police. We got a crisis. Texas, the counties in Texas, those municipalities along the southern border have been overwhelmed for the past 3 years, and you heard nothing from the Democrats. Nothing. It's all okay. It's not my problem. I'm up there in the cushy East Coast. So they start busing them up there. It's a beautiful thing. And now the American people are paying attention. They're paying attention to the Biden border crisis. The Democrats didn't care. They didn't care about the border crisis for the last 3 years of this administration, and now they care. Really, folks? Really? Do you think the Democrats truly care? I find the timing of it interesting. We are 10 months away from a general election. Joe's approval rating is in the toilet. It's 33%. You can get online and look at all these residents of all these large cities, New York, Chicago. They're a little grumpy. They're a little grumpy. They're saying, Mayor, what the hell's happening to our city here? And they're paying attention. They're expressing their outrage, and now the Democrats want to secure the southern border. My advice, this is real plain and simple. My advice to the Democrats, call Joe. Call Joe. Use the executive orders today to secure our southern border. Because if you don't, Joe, the American people will act, and Donald Trump will fix it again. Joe Biden does not need Congress. He doesn't need Congress to do anything to address this crisis. Trump didn't have the support from Congress to address the border. He did it through 21 executive orders and 25 presidential memoranda. And his policies kept the greatest threat to our country, the dishonest media. They won't hold the Biden administration accountable. They will deflect. They'll say it's Congress. It's Congress that hasn't done anything to secure the southern border. And Congress as a whole has done nothing to address the southern border. Joe Biden did it all by himself through executive order. He took all of Trump's policies and just reversed them all when it was the safest country in decades. We had more border security under Donald Trump than we had in decades. So no, folks, let's be honest with each other. Nothing's going to get done. The Democrats don't want to have anything to do with H.R. 2. They've already said it. Joe doesn't want to fix the crisis at our southern border because it's all by design. Joe puts America last. He puts the American people last. I have about another minute and a half, and Mr. Camerado, are you familiar with the public charge rule, my friend?
Yes.
Explain it. Explain that for the sixth grader.
Well, very briefly, it's the idea that we try to evaluate new legal immigrants so that they're not going to end up on public benefits. And if it looks like you are, it's possible in that process they'll deny you a green card, which is permanent residency.
Yeah. And Trump is just looking out for America like he always has. He defined public charge as an immigrant who receives one or more designated public benefits for more than 12 months within a 36-month period. Rightfully included SNAP benefits, housing vouchers, Medicaid benefits that would disqualify an immigrant from receiving a green card. To me, it's a no-brainer. If you need two of these, you should be considered a public charge. Is it true in September 2022 that the Biden administration published a new public charge inadmissibly regulations that reversed Trump's public charge regulations?
Yes, they abandoned the expansive idea and just made it a couple of programs.
Do you think it incentivizes more people to come to the United States? Hey, I'm from Guatemala. I'm going to come. I'm going to get my food, housing, health care, everything. I'm going to come, and I'm going to come now. I've been invited by this president.
It could. We estimate that 52% of legal immigrant households access one or more welfare programs. So those rates are high.
And we're $34 trillion in debt. I yield back.
Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Thank you very much. The last time I recall studying civics or walking through these halls, I reflect on the fact that we are the United States of America. What happens to one state or one community can happen to another. So I'm not proud of the idea of migrants, babies, families who are fleeing true persecution to be distributed across the nation without regard for their humanity. But I'm a problem solver, which is what this committee should be doing. So I want to pose my question to Chief Mello to be able to say, first of all, I'm a years-long member of the Congressional Fire Caucus. I am a great champion of firefighters. I served on the Homeland Security Committee, served, and fought mightily for the benefits for firefighters and their families after 9/11. We finally got some relief. I know that during the American Rescue Plan, during COVID, funding came to local communities. Did it not?
Yes, ma'am.
Those were federal dollars.
Yes, ma'am.
Were those dollars welcomed?
Yes, ma'am.
Some of them, I hope, got to you firefighters and EMS who never stopped during that crisis. Did some of them come your way, sir? Or in your community?
Some of that money came into my community, yes, ma'am.
Thank you so very much. So I'm committed to getting you dollars. And we have had a plan that the president has put forward of $13.6 billion. That is your money, part of it. Federal dollars that would come directly to Eagle Pass, and the chief, who I could tell the emotion in your voice as you had to deal with the little 3-month-old that didn't make it. Is that what you said? The 3-month-old didn't make it?
The 3-month-old and the 3-year-old, they were both brothers. They didn't make it.
They didn't make it.
No, ma'am.
I can imagine your men and women dealing with that. So let me just share with you and let you know quickly that $13.6 billion, which has been held up by Republicans, would be Border Patrol agents, cutting-edge inspection machines, 1,000 law enforcement personnel investigative capacity, 1,600 additional asylum officers, 375 new immigration judges, additional grants to local governments and nonprofits. Sir, that's you directly. Critical border management activities, expansion of lawful pathways, not for everyone, but I do think you see some individuals, and you're not in immigration, Chief, but you might answer this, that may have a reason for asylum. Just in your own course, have you seen those kind of people?
In my personal opinion, I've seen yes. I've seen some families that would benefit the United States, but I've seen several that are individuals that would not benefit the United
And we need to make sure that those individuals do not come here to do harm. I understand that, and that's what this would do. Support for eligible arrivals, funding to conduct robust child labor investigations, and reimbursement to the Department of Defense for its support. But on here is 1,000 law enforcement investigative so that we don't have the bad guys here. But none of this has been moved because my friends on the other side failed to realize that we are the United States of America, and as you are chief in Eagle Pass, there are fire chiefs in New York, there are fire chiefs in other cities who want to do the right thing. So I just simply have a short period of time. If we could get this $13.6 billion passed and get that money coming to you that you could use effectively, how helpful would that be?
That would be very helpful, very, very helpful.
And do you need that money now?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Chen, would you please, you heard me list some of the elements, you know what those dollars will be going for. Explain how this money would be very effective in easing that border crisis and reflecting that we are the United States of America and that the migration and immigration, migrants and immigrants collectively have been contributors to the nation's economy, but to the nation's goodness. Can you tell me how some of these elements that I've read off would be effective in the work of helping ease this crisis?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I'll start with the program that I think you referenced a moment ago, the Shelter and Services Program run by FEMA. I was actually talking with the chief here just before the hearing started about how the money, it's about $360 million that's already been given out in fiscal year 2023 to cities and localities across the country. More is needed. That funding should come to ensure that temporary services, temporary assistance, transportation, emergency medical screenings, those kinds of needs are met. That would help greatly small towns like Eagle Pass or cities in the interior in welcoming immigrants that are coming to the country.
Thank you, Mr. Gentleman, lady's time has expired. Mr. Moore.
Thank you for the witnesses being here today. Our social services programs have been negatively affected by the rise in migrants. Taxpayers have footed a bill for illegal immigrants by shelling out over $150 billion of their hard-earned money. I saw firsthand at the border, hospitals are overflowed. American citizens had to travel for hours to get their medical needs met because the local hospitals could not take them. Whether it be your doctor's appointments, your kids' teachers being stretched thin, you can bet that they have been negatively impacted by the illegal immigration. One of the things I found interesting, and as we were traveling in Yuma, Arizona, is the hospitals, the young people, the young ladies would come right across the border and have a baby. And then by federal law, the hospitals had to provide the car seats before they could send them on their way. So we're not doing anything to secure the U.S. southern border. Chief, I know you'd like to have the additional money, but wouldn't you rather us do some things to kind of slow the flow from other countries? I mean, we had 106 different nations come through Yuma, Arizona, according to Sheriff Daniels. Wouldn't you rather us do something besides send money? It's like setting a house on fire and then funding the fire department. I don't quite understand the benefit of extra money while we're setting the place on fire. So, Chief, would you rather us just secure the border and stop this flow of immigrants from all over the globe? 302,000 last month, I think, came here. Wouldn't that be better than just sending a little money?
Yes, sir.
I think not only just for you, sir, but the people that are dying 150 a day that are dying of fentanyl poisoning. I think it'd be better for those families as well. Or the displaced American citizens that we're now kicking out of school systems. There's a lot of things we can do instead of just funding the failure of this Department of Homeland Security and this executive branch that we've got that have created this issue. Sheriff Daniels said in here in testimony in 2018, or he said he'd been there 40 years on the border. Never had he seen it as good as it was in 2018, and never as bad as it is right now, and that was before last month. And so there are a lot of things. It's always government. We want to throw more money at the problem. We create the problem, we set the building on fire, and then we fund the fire department. That's kind of the way I see this. And so anyway, is it Ms. Egoroff? Is that how you say it? With the new strain influx of illegal immigrants, can you explain kind of what this is doing to your schools? I mean, we have these, I understand there are 57 different dialects of Spanish that are just south of the U.S. southern border down through South America. Are we seeing where we just really cannot communicate to these kids? And can you talk about the strain that it's putting on your school system?
I think the biggest problem is that there's already a shortage of ESL teachers, so teachers who can teach children who don't speak English. And even if we had more financial resources, there's just so many teachers who can who are qualified to teach these children. And also, as I mentioned, I think the paraprofessionals shortage is already existed as well. And so the children who are coming, who are crossing the border, are going through some horrible experiences. They're arriving with very severe needs. And our schools are not necessarily designed to deal with such, impacts on their mental health and physical health.
Ms. Aguirre, when you say severe needs, can you elaborate a little bit? Is it, because I understand we have over 86,000 unaccompanied minors that we've lost. The federal government has brought here, and we've shipped them to all over the United States, and we're hearing about these kids working now in these sweatshops or whatever you want to call them. But also, we're not even background checking. We had one sponsor that got 20 children, and we didn't do a background check. So we don't know where we sent these 20 children to this one individual. So could you talk about, I don't have a whole lot of time, but just when you say some pretty extreme situations, or can you elaborate a little bit on what we're looking at?
I can give you anecdotal data about my district. I believe just last month there was a 10-year-old in a shelter who committed suicide. We don't know what that boy went through crossing the border, right? But I think that, the federal government has provided us data. In my testimony, I refer to the 2019 report that specifically says how children are being raped, are being child trafficked, there's sexual violence, sexual trafficking, and literally there are, if you look in the internet, there are videos of children who have been medicated, who are not even, conscious, being used to cross the border. And there are many cases in that report of the Homeland Security as well, of children who are being used. They literally come, help an adult get into the U.S., and they are sent back to help another
Yeah, they're like on a treadmill. They come over, they identify as the student or the child of this individual adult. Then they grab the child once the adult's here, send them back across the border, and they're basically just on a little treadmill.
It's child trafficking, and we have known that for many years because there is a report from the Department of Homeland Security.
My time's up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we're here to talk about the drain of illegal immigration and Biden's open border policies and how they're affecting the American taxpayer. Recently, airline safety has also become an issue of paramount concern. People are concerned or rather not doors are going to fly off planes and panels, but I'm here to tell you about the issue that starts with safety long before anybody in this room will actually board a plane. Biden's open border policies are overburdening the TSA and making it more difficult for the TSA agents to do their jobs effectively. The TSA was created after 9/11 to oversee security in all modes of transportation, including aviation safety. As an American, we have to go through security screening and board a plane just like everybody else. And what you also may know is that the TSA has an entirely different standard for illegal immigrants. That's right. There's a different set of rules for you, the American public, and illegal immigrants. You've all seen the TSA check line, of course. Well, I have news for you. Biden's DHS has created another line, and here is the picture to prove it. This is a line in the Tucson airport, specially made for non-citizens. And as you can see, the sign says, non-U.S. citizens without passports enter here. And without passports, that is just the tip of the iceberg. These illegal immigrants may go unvetted with no verifiable photo ID at all. And I guess Biden and Mayorkas want us all to trust that these people are going to say who they are based on just their honesty and their word alone. You know what a valid form of ID is for an illegal alien according to TSA today? An arrest warrant. I'm not making that up. You could get on a plane with an arrest warrant. And if an arrest warrant could get an illegal alien on a domestic flight, then why can't it get them a one-way ticket to jail where they belong? This is not only an assault on an American citizen, but a grave threat to our national security. I'm a member of Congress. I have TSA pre-check and clear. And when I get screened by TSA, I have to prove that I am who I say I am with an official government ID. For the record, my name is Wesley P. Hunt, as in Parish Hunt. But if my airline ticket says Wesley J. Hunt, this United States congressman ain't getting on the plane. The TSA is tasked with airline security, but they're letting illegal immigrants on our planes with unverifiable identities. We also know that in the last 2 years, over 200 people on the terrorist watch list have been caught at the border that we know of. And for the record, I'm a post 9/11 veteran. I deployed to Iraq. I'm a West Point grad. I fought for this country to keep those people out of our country, to keep it safer. And now we are failing the American public. I'm a Texan, born and raised in Houston, Texas. And Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, has taken steps to stop the flow of illegal immigration. And by the way, that's not his job. That's the federal government's job. Governor Abbott put buoys in the Rio Grande, set up fences and barbed wire, just to name a few protocols. And how did Biden reward Governor Abbott for his efforts? He sued the state of Texas. The federal government sued the state for doing the job the federal government should be doing by keeping you safe. This illegal invasion is a destruction of federal immigration law and the elimination of any sort of protocol on our southern border that is not the result of negligence, malfeasance, or incompetence. This is in fact the goal. And Biden is allowing this, he's not only allowing this catastrophe, he's facilitating it. And the goal of the Biden administration is to flood this country with tens of millions of illegal immigrants, fly them to a town near you, and if you question it, they'll call you a racist. There, I said it. The root cause of immigration begins and ends at 1600 Pennsylvania. If you want another 9/11 in this country, keep the border wide open. And I suggest that we don't. I yield back the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
For what purpose does the gentlelady rise?
I ask for submission for the ability to submit into the record the following items. I ask unanimous consent. White House calls on Congress to advance critical national security priorities, which provides for us the detailing of the federal immigration funding that is required to help the chief from Eagle Pass. Ask unanimous consent. Ask unanimous consent to add to the record the following statements of the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, Center for Law and Social Policy, Church World Service, National Immigration Forum, National Immigration Law Center, United U.S., United We Dream, and Women's Refugee Commission, and the work of the National Association of Christian Churches, Pastor Ortega. They are the ones that stand ready to open up centers, feeding, housing, clothing of those innocent and non-criminal individuals who have come here because they're fleeing persecution. I ask unanimous consent that all these documents be able to be submitted into
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Sousa Egorov, you've heard the Democrats for the last 2 hours do what they've been doing for years. They love to conflate legal immigrants like your family, who've obeyed all of our laws, who've waited patiently in line, who've done everything our country has asked of them, with illegal immigrants whose very first act in this country is to break our laws. Now, the legal immigrants I know find this infuriating. They find it patronizing. They find it insulting. What are your thoughts?
My husband and I are incredibly grateful for the opportunity to live in America and to raise our family.
How do you feel when you hear your family's law-abiding behavior compared with that of illegal immigrants?
What I want is to make sure that my kids have the same opportunities that we had here to work and to study. We need to have some kind of process to prioritize who's coming to our country. And I think it should be
and observe,
contribute to legal process, yes.
Yeah, and observe the rule of law as your family.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. And with some vetting process. There is no vetting now.
Dr. Camarota, your studies entirely are on illegal immigrants. And what you have done is to take with extensive studies, the cost of the services demanded by those illegal immigrants compared to the taxes that they pay. Am I correct on this?
Yes, we have an estimate for that, yes.
And that estimate is $68,000 net cost to U.S. taxpayers per illegal immigrant. Is that correct?
That's the lifetime net fiscal drain, yes.
Right. Now we've had 5 million illegal immigrants enter this country and be released into it. 3.3 million deliberately released, another 1.7 million gotaways. That's 5 million total. Now, according to my figures, that is a staggering $340 billion a year of net costs to the American people.
Yeah, just to be clear, that's a lifetime cost.
Right.
And that would assume that the educational attainment, that's the key thing. Legal immigrants are much more educated than illegal immigrants.
Of course.
And that's what drives the cost estimate, not illegality or anything like that. It's the same reason, just to give you an example, why cities and states worry so much about losing their middle-class tax base.
Let's just finish the math here. Gallup, 2 years ago, estimated from their surveys there are 42 million people living in poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean who intend to come here now that they can. That comes to more than $2.8 trillion of costs to U.S. taxpayers, and that's just for immigration from Latin America and from the Caribbean. These are staggering numbers, and I thank you for your studies on this. Chief Mello, when we were at Eagle Pass last week, we were told that 1,700 migrants have perished just on American soil during this administration since it took office. No one knows how many have perished south of the border. What have you encountered, and what can you describe that it means to perish in the Texas desert?
Can you repeat that question, sir?
What have you encountered in terms of people perishing, migrants perishing on American soil?
I've encountered several out in the field. What we call the field is the ranches, out in the ranches in the summertime. All along the year, we saw 43 drownings in the Rio Grande. That's not counting on the Mexican side, just Eagle Pass picking up migrants.
Do you think that many of these people would have made this dangerous trek if they knew they'd be turned back at the border?
When we've picked them up, they regret making that trek.
But they made it because they knew they'd be admitted into the country, did they not?
Yes, sir.
The Democrats' witness says we simply need more money to process people into the country faster, allow them to stay, and provide even more free services to support them. Will this reduce illegal immigration or increase it?
I think it'll increase it.
And can you describe the situation that you've had with illegal immigration at the end of the Trump administration compared with the situation you face today?
The increase, the cost to the city, the cost of not being a normal community. We're being overwhelmed. We're being overwhelmed. One thing I can say is it needs to stop.
Thank you very much. I thank all of you for your testimony, and I believe that our members have exhausted their questions. So again, thank you for making the trip here today. Thank you for your expert testimony. This will conclude today's hearing. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And without objection, the hearing is adjourned.